So, how much research should a salesperson do before he reaches out to a prospect? We're going to talk all about it in this episode of Closing Time. Welcome to Closing Time, the show for go-to-market leaders. My name is Chip House. I'm the CMO of Insightly CRM, and I'm super excited about today because I'm joined by Justin Fite, who has a wealth of experience in B2B SaaS, like about 20 years. And I used to work together with Justin, so I know him pretty well. And currently, he's the principal and founder of J3 Consulting, an executive advisory firm. And we had an interesting discussion last week that really made me think about having him on Closing Time. And Justin, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely, Chip. Great to see you again. Happy to be here. Thanks for the chance to keep our conversation going.
Yeah, for sure. So you were talking about, like I mentioned, you have a ton of experience selling yourself and managing sales teams in the past several years in B2B SaaS. And you uncovered something that I thought was super interesting after talking to a number of different salespeople. You learned that they actually did very little research before they would reach out to a prospect. Can you talk about that? Like, why did you ask those questions and what did you learn?
Yeah, for sure. So this whole thing started when I kept, and you know this too from our shared history, I kept running into symptoms of lack of velocity in a pipeline, for instance, as an example. And it was really challenging to determine some of the root causes of that. So it's been a nagging issue for quite some time that I've struggled with myself as a sales leader, and many others have too. When I started to dig into what were some of the precursors that led to that kind of issue, what I started to see was a pattern emerge. This pattern was a lack of understanding. So you described it as research, and that's a great term for it, which is do we understand enough about the person we're about to get on the phone with, or the people that we call our ICP? And as I started, I'm involved in hiring a bunch of people over the years, and I started asking them, what do you do to prep for a call? Like, what is your research? And aside from large deal research where you spend a lot of time with account strategy, most of us are involved in average technology sales of average size. That prep, it turns out, and this is anecdotal, not scientific yet, but is about 15 minutes prior to the call. So for many reasons, it just doesn't offer the opportunity to do enough, do a deep enough research, and typically the reps can't get their hands on the right data.
Yeah, so we've had Samantha McKenna on the podcast, for example, and she talks about show me you know me, right? And it has a long demonstrated past of that kind of knowledge about a prospect, even what makes them tick, and being able to add that personalization, to your discussions can be the difference between a door shut in your face versus a happy conversation that leads to a closed deal. And so it sounds like you kind of ran into that where you were seeing deals stall or maybe deals not close. And so what do you think a typical salesperson should do? What amount of research is appropriate or engagement with a specific prospect, and how do they do it before they reach out?
Yeah, so that's a great characterization. Show me you know me. I would say we as salespeople have probably misunderstood the word "me" in that statement, because it's show me you know my problem, my constraints, my priorities, my language, and I think that's. And I'll throw myself in this for sure, but it's like we're just shallow. So what we're looking at now, anecdotally, is LinkedIn and your website. And your LinkedIn profile, Chip, while it tells me where you went to school and the jobs you've had, probably, I'm not sure that really describes your world at Insightly. And what common understanding would I possibly have about the challenges of your particular space in the CRM, in CRM? So that we're typically looking at the wrong sources, and we're not getting a summary in a time that we can activate it to a degree that makes us more effective to build a relationship with you. If I really do know you, then I probably know a little bit about the challenges you face, and we have some common ground, maybe some common language about the challenges. That's everybody says this, and our good friend and coworker Todd Capone in transparency sales, like you got to build a relationship with each other, and then you might open up and say, I'm really stuck on these few issues. You might, but if I just reference your school, that might not be enough to have you open up.
Yeah, I think some attempts at personalization kind of come off shallow, especially if the research was 15 minutes long on LinkedIn ahead of time, right? Because then you don't seem credible, right? And who wants to talk to somebody who does not seem credible?
Yeah.
So, there's a piece about this that you're talking about, which is understanding the pain, and so there's understanding the individual person's pain because of their role, because of the type of company they're in or the stage, maybe because of the industry that they're in, right? And all of these things are super valid ways to best understand the pain. Um, and what do you think is most important, Justin? Or are they all important?
I think that's why salespeople beg marketing and product marketing people to help us with customers, like understand the language of the customer, because once you're a customer, there's more trust. Typically there's more openness, there's more sharing of what's really going on inside the organization that isn't very well shared pre-sales. That information is so rich with insights and perspective that is valuable in the sales process, in the building of those relationships and the trust. And I think those parts are just hard to find if you're trusting, sometimes high level market research about what people are doing in general. That comes across as a little too high level. If I had some insights from somebody exactly in your role, probably as close to exactly as possible, that would be really valuable, because then I would better understand the challenges you might face. The difficulty there is the people in that role that salespeople are talking to are engaged in an active sales conversation, and that's kind of a high pressure. Salespeople are not very adept, I think, at cultivating that, and sales calls aren't the best environments for getting candid, let's say, thoughtful feedback about, do you understand my message?
And so I know that you're doing some of this on behalf of a couple brands out there, right? So you're going out and seeking specific feedback to understand the pain. So are you doing just like in-depth interviews with people that kind of match the ICP, or what are you doing?
That's exactly right. So it was something that I had never applied to a sales situation. True research, true market research. I knew of it, and as a non-marketer, didn't have a chance to play around with that as a motion very often. But I never thought of applying that to sales because it felt very heavy. There are ways to do research where I can find people that are in your role as CMO, and in a synchronous or asynchronous way, engage them to do a couple things. One, first and foremost, make sure that they have the problem that I think I solve as a solution provider. That's first and foremost. Do they have the problem? If they have the problem, then I can start asking them a lot of questions about how do you think about this problem? What are the approaches you've taken? I can go so far as to ask them, look at the way I describe the solution and tell me what you think. So it's a modern take, let's say, on a classic market research motion, but we're applying that. I wanted to apply that directly in the sales process, because as you know, it takes us a quarter to process a bunch of leads and prospects and get data back and to say, hey, our message isn't resonating, or we're off on what we thought were the three priorities. Waiting a quarter to get that data is way too long. And I think what my hope is I can shorten that cycle by engaging ICPs that are not prospects. I'm not prospecting them per se. I'm learning from them. I'm trying to find somebody who struggles with the challenges you face, Chip, as a CMO, and better understand what challenges CMOs face, so I can be more credible and more aligned to what it is you need.
Justin, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the Donald Miller story brand methodology, where the customer is the hero, right? So he's sort of the Luke Skywalker, and you, as the salesperson, are the guide, or like you're the Yoda, basically, right? And you're trying to make them the hero. You try to understand their problem. You're trying to lead them towards a solution. And with that said, when you're talking to an ICP, it may not be the exact individual, so there might be some difference in the pain potentially. It's enough direction that it can get you started, to ideate or at least ask some discovery questions. Are you experiencing this? Based on my experience in this industry or in your role, you might be experiencing this. Is that what you're seeing? And so it's a good chance to get a good clarifying question, I assume. One of the things that we talked about is ICP is a bell curve, right? So nobody is going to maybe be perfect on there. There's going to be some better fits, some worse fits, that are kind of on the margin. But how do you think about, being able to get alignment between sales and marketing around ICP and that pain?
Yeah, and I think I loved your characterization when we talked last time about that bell curve, because I think it's not a single signal of who fits or who has these challenges, because as we know, when we sell, there's multiple roles in these organizations that are associated with solving this problem, so they have a different perspective, each of them. I think the same challenge applies to marketers. Uh, they share, when you think about go to market as as like a combination of those two roles, they share the same challenges, which is, one, what are the ways we want to describe the problem and the solution and its matching solution in the most effective, shortest, simplest way that conveys the value and conveys that we understand. So any insights from people who represent the audience that we're attempting to go after, that I think is valuable. And I think the cycle time, the thing that I was intrigued by about this research loop, that we kind of call it a research loop, is it can be incredibly precise. We can ask someone 3 questions and get an answer back in kind of 10 days, less than 10 days. So it's a really kind of quick, lightweight way to confirm what you think you believe is the number one priority.
So what are those questions, Justin? It sounds like you've tested them out a bit. What are those questions?
Yeah, I think the first thing is orient yourself around how important is this problem in the constellation of problems you face. Because I want to know if I'm the 5th problem on your list or the 2nd. Because I may take a different approach. I may take more of an educational approach if this is something down your list, right? So that's first, orient around the problem. I think the second is, it's going to sound really simple, but what is the language that you use to describe this? And I think that almost sounds like no duh, but I think we invent our own language. Sales is bad at this too. We come up with all kinds of ways to say things, and it may not match with, it just simply may not match with how you think about your problem, how you describe it. So if the language in your messaging, or my messaging to you, is 20% off, or it's off, then it doesn't resonate as well. It doesn't sound like I understand you. So those are 2 areas that come right off the top. And then you get very specific, which is, look at what I prioritize as the 3 ways to solve this. Do you agree? And am I missing anything? And that's a question that we'd love to say we answer in sales. Do you understand the way I describe this problem? I would love to admit that I would love to say that salespeople do that. I would love to say I did it all the time. We don't do that. We're pressing, right? As salespeople, we don't listen as much as we should. We're pressing. That's kind of our responsibility. It's a poor excuse, but it is a reason.
I love that third question, because it kind of leaves it a little bit open-ended for them to kind of explore the edges of their pain, right? Here's what else you need to think about. And I'm sure there's like a huge discovery aha moment that happens in almost every conversation you have.
Yeah, it is. It's fantastic, and there's a lot of people willing to give a lot of thoughtful feedback to these problems. Right, they're in the middle of the problem. They have the problem, and they share their opinions on it. Now, it's not the be all end all source of how to build your marketing plan, but it's very informative to reps who, in the absence of this, I go back to where'd you go to school, Chip, kind of thing. And it's a little thin, to be
Yeah.
honest. And it also creates a pernicious other effect, which is if I'm selling technology and I don't have a lot to say to you, my default is into, let me show you some features. Let me show you what we got. And
Right.
I think that's kind of a default mode that a lot of salespeople kind of accidentally trip into because I don't have enough of meaning to share with you.
Yeah, makes sense. And that might have been a tactic from 2001, maybe, but it's no longer
Yes,
super effective. Yeah,
exactly.
feature selling is not the way to go. And so, but you kind of put your finger on the challenge, I think, for a lot of sales organizations and a lot of sales leaders is how can you ensure that the reps activate this in the field?
If you believe, and I anecdotally I do believe it. I've seen it over and over again, which is the window is literally 15 or 20 minutes before I get on the phone with you. Like that's I really do believe that. It's probably plenty of exceptions to that rule, but I think it's a pretty good guess. What could you possibly put in front of a sales rep to have something come out of their mouth that would make sense and be convey some understanding? It is not them thinking that they're going to quickly page through a 50 slide deck of ICP background and pull something out. They're not going to pull a research paper with 35 pages in it out and find some jewel. They're going to look at their prior deals. They're going to look at Slack. They're going to look at things like that. So I think the mechanism is I need to collect the right data. I need to analyze that enough to pull out the insights. And I need to present that in a way that a rep can look at it just like they're looking at Slack. In fact, pinning it to Slack would be great. I think while the ICP alignment changes over time, it doesn't change overnight probably. So it's pretty consistent for a period of time depending on the circumstances. But you got to get it into a form that is summarized, some bulletized things, which is here are the three personas, here are the major points, here's three quotes from each of them. We go so far as I want to put the 30-second video clip of you saying, I don't understand why people prioritize these features when these features are more important. As that'd be a great talking point if I got on the phone later with somebody in your same role and said, I've had people say these are higher priorities than these other things. How do you prioritize them? It's more engaging. It's more meaningful to you if I'm talking to you.
Yeah, I mean that's the tough thing I think in all of sales, right? Because there's probably some of the top salespeople out there do this kind of thing naturally, right? Without even thinking about it. It's sort of the unconscious competence, right?
Yep.
Versus you as a leader trying to operationalize this skill, which is it's truly a learned skill, probably, or that a lot of people don't even realize if they're good at it that they're doing. It's just part of their process, and so it's super interesting. Do you have any final thoughts you want to share with us, Justin?
I gotta believe there are ways to marry some of the techniques that Chip you've used as a marketer and namely research. You started with that, marry that, and move that more into the sales motion. Right, we're running at a higher speed. We're running at a higher volume. We can use some of that technique, some of those marketing research techniques, if they can be lightweight enough and precise enough, which I've definitely found a way to do that, and insert that into the sales motion, so we don't have to wait as long to figure out that we're not saying the right things. And I think that's what I'm most interested in helping people try to do. And it's a challenge because there's a lot of moving parts and all that.
Yeah, well, I love your unique insights about this, Justin, and thanks so much for joining the show.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was phenomenal to have you, and thanks to all of you for joining us on this week's episode of Closing Time, and we'll see you next time.